Welcome back. And let's do a recap of episode 1. Do you remember the number that we talked about? It was the Gini coefficient. You know, the measurement, the statistical measurement that measures inequality. And you can put certain variables in there, such as race. So that number again that I identified, which was the 0.4966 being the Gini coefficient, it measures income inequality based off of race. And yet, and still people say that we always make it about race. Yep, that's what statistically they have something that measures that. That's the parity gap. The number is a ghost that haunts every bank statement and every boardroom in Rochester. But numbers don't move on their own. They are moved by people, or in Rochester's case, by the absence of people. What are we going to talk about today? I'm glad you asked. We're going to look at the result of the structural failure, because it's a structural failure. We're going to talk about brain drain. Let's define the term with clinical precision. In economics, we call it human capital flight. It occurs when the return on investment, I'm always saying that. People who know me, I'm always asking, what is the return on investment? For individuals with education and talent, when that education and talent is put on a higher pedestal somewhere else, they leave. They call that brain drain. It's what happens when a geographic area loses its most talented, most educated, and most skilled individuals because there's no economic oxygen left for them to breathe. But let's not get uncomfortable. In Rochester, brain drain isn't a tragic accident. It's not. It's a filtration system. And I think that's the best way to characterize this. Think about the geography. We have an intelligence corridor in our backyard. You have several institutions, higher education institutions that are here. Just to name a few, the University of Rochester, which is my alma mater. You have RIT. You have St. John Fisher, and Nazareth, and Brockport. We are an assembly line for brilliance. At least so it's supposed to be that. Every May, these institutions produce Black social workers, Black engineers, Black accountants, so on and so forth. You get the picture. And yet, look at the data. The ink on those diplomas is barely dry before recruiters in larger cities, such as Atlanta, Charlotte, Dallas, or DC, start calling those people. And being that they can't find anything here, because let's also reiterate the point that many of these companies are gatekeeping high-paying jobs from Black and brown people here in Rochester. And that was confirmed by the Chamber of Commerce. And when I was putting this episode together, I had to go someplace because a lot of times people would say, oh, well, I moved because of the weather. Because of the snow, I didn't like the snow. I think that plays a role in it, most definitely. But at one point in time, if you look at the 90s, when the money was flowing and people were working at Xerox and Kodak and stuff like that, and Black people were able to get a slice of the pie, there were people who put up with the snow. There were people that put up with the snow. People would shovel some snow for a $150,000 salary and a path to the C-suite. And some people didn't even get that, and they withstood the snow, okay? They leave Rochester because it has a gatekeeper problem. That's what the issue is the gatekeeping. You know, they often refer to it as the good old boys club in the city, which still exists. It just wears Pagtonia vests now instead of wool suits. Has perfected the art of the invisible resume. You can have the master's degree, in my case, the Lean Six Sigma Green Belt. You can have the data that shows that you can save a hospital system $5 million in waste. But if you don't have that permission slip from the good old boys club, your resume is essentially just a blank sheet of paper. And I think that some people here, they don't realize that. They don't realize that. Because I'm just going to go on a limb like Tina Marie. Since being back, because again, remember, My contract in Atlanta, excuse me, was cut due to racism. And I eventually learned the intricacies of a right to work state. New York State is not right to work, it is at will. So down there, they can hide behind their racism. The excuse that was given for my contract to be cut, and still to this day, when I think about it and I think about the last conversation that I had with my recruiter through Kelly Services, it was a Freudian slip. It was a Freudian slip. It wasn't intended for her to tell me that the nurse that was over everything now because they pushed out a black AVP of the department and they pushed out a black director, and that black director was from Johns Hopkins, and they both were black women. And this was before the orange man got into office, before black unemployment increased in the manner that it did. This was before all of that. And I know that I'm not an anomaly. I know that it was happening, but just on a smaller scale. That's the thing that many people do not realize. Before we move forward, this is the thing that really gets me because I was once on TikTok. I still am. I'm just not on there as frequently as I was. And both on TikTok as well as regular life, there were some people who looked at me who looked just like me, excuse me, and they would be like, "You're just complaining. You're just complaining." When the difference between me and those people who claimed that I was complaining, I had the skills to be able to look at this as a system, to look at the systemic remnants of what is contributing to the core causation as to the positioning as to where I am. When I was in Atlanta, let's talk about it. Let's really talk about it. Let's have a real transparent conversation this morning on this Friday, January 9th, with it raining outside. After my contract was cut, do you want to know how much debt I went into? Because the only jobs that I could get was at Target and Walgreens. Those were the only jobs that I could get. To drive the point further home, I did research studies. Nothing where you had to take. It was like trying chicken because Buffalo Wild Wings is, coming out with a new sauce or whatever the case may be. And you would get a gift card, and that sufficed for my grocery budget. Yep. And let me tell you, them rooms was packed with people who look like me. And now and again, not every now and again, and now and again, you'll see some white folk, but it was mostly people who looked like me. And we were doing this to survive down there in this right to work state. But I'm not going to go on a tangent, but I could give you a history lesson about right to work states. But we're going to move on. Back to the brain drain. We aren't just losing workers. We are losing the compounding interest of leadership. When a 25-year-old black engineer leaves for Atlanta, we don't just lose that engineer. We lose the firm he would have started at the age of 35. We lose the 50 jobs he would have created at 45. We lose the tax base. We lose the mentorship. Rochester is harvesting the seeds of its own future and then wondering why the field is empty when harvest time comes. It's trying to understand why people here who have been in leadership positions for so long, why are they not looking at it like this? Or if they are, why is there this level of gatekeeping? Why is there this level of gate? And here's the thing. It's just not these people. No, I'm going to do an episode later on in the season where we're going to talk about the gatekeeping that we do to each other. Not to give too much away, but I saw that when I interviewed at Anthony Jordan. Mind you, I used to work there years and years and years ago. The way that I was treated in the second interview for the program manager, mind you, I just applied for that just for shits and giggles. The first position that I applied for that I had my eyes set on was the director of quality improvement. And for the longest time, they didn't want to tell me who the person was. So one day I called. It was random. One day I had called. It's been about what, maybe 8 or 9 months that person has been in this position. I got a name. I looked on LinkedIn because I was able to talk to somebody and they spilled the beans. That worked there. They spilled the beans. And let me tell you, I looked up their LinkedIn. I saw that they were nowhere near as qualified as I was. Let me say it again, because that was a moment of silence. They were nowhere near as qualified as I am to be the director of quality improvement. And I'm going to leave that right there. But we'll talk about that later on in the season. But now, what we're going to do is we're going to pivot a little bit and we're going to do a forensic audit of culture fit. I know you've heard that. I know you've heard that. You don't have to be in HR to know that one. No, you know that. So let's begin. Let's perform a forensic audit on a phrase that serves as the quote unquote silent killer of Black careers in this city. Yeah, Rochester, New York. It's culture fit. It's culture fit. If you ask me, this is how many white people hide their racism or formalize their level of racism is through culture fit. But that's just me. So again, let's look at this. It says, as a Six Sigma green belt, which I have, I am trained to look at quote unquote fit as a mechanical requirement. In manufacturing, if a part doesn't fit the machine, you don't throw away the part, you audit the machine. You check the tolerances. You ask why the machine is out of alignment. But in Rochester's HR departments, culture fit is used as a bypass for excellence. It's the polite corporate way of saying, now check this, your excellence makes our mediocrity uncomfortable. Let me say that one more time for the people in the back. Your excellence makes our mediocrity uncomfortable. Now let's get personal. When I moved back here from Atlanta, I wasn't just looking for a paycheck. I was coming home to build. I had an executive residency under my belt, which I achieved at the age of 27. I did that in Buffalo, New York. We could talk about that later, because, that was rather interesting. I have my master's degree, master's in healthcare administration. I have a decade of high-level healthcare experience in some of the most competitive markets in the country. But yet and still, check this, I found myself sitting at a cubicle at Maximus. If you're not familiar with Maximus, look it up. It's a call center. And it was so interesting to see, oh my God, it makes me cringe, as to how some people, they would utilize cognitive dissonance and overcompensate. They would say, well, at least the job is in healthcare. You're signing people up to, get health insurance. But there was a tinge there. There was a tinge there because some people, not all, but some people were experiencing a situation where they're living in poverty. But by the time we get to the end of that application, the only thing that they qualified for were plans that were $200, $300, $400. Then there were people who felt comfortable enough to tell me, yeah, I have this big bill because I had went to the emergency room and I don't know how I'm going to pay it. And it's not like they qualify for Medicaid because, Medicaid is retroactive. It'll go back 3 months. So they're just like, so what is it that I'm supposed to do? I know the people in the QC department, they did not like my calls because sometimes I was instructing people and helping them navigate charity care. There's something that you can't pay. Call them and get an itemized list, because when you get an itemized list, some of those charges will drop off. And if you still can't pay it, then ask about charity care and what is the process so you can get some coverage when it comes to the payment. They didn't like that. But it's so funny though, because I would say maybe 3 days after I got fired from Maximus, yeah, the boy your boy got fired. I held on to that job for about 10 months, and that was the most stressful 10 months ever, okay? I held on to that job, and then after I got fired, after I got my freedom papers, it's so weird saying that, freedom papers. Let me tell you, I saw this documentary regarding Maximus. I think the guy's name was Daniel Thatcher. He was a subject matter expert regarding this whole thing. And the documentary was talking about how Maximus was getting over on poor people. Mhm. Yep. Imma let that rest right there. So while you have some people who, of course, they're willing to do the work because they have bills to pay, and they're ignorant to the fact that the work that they're doing is actually causing more harm than good, that's that right there. And of course, I learned that along the way. That documentary was just a confirmation to what I thought and knew. So I knew I wasn't gonna stay there that long, just from an ethical standpoint. I like how Ayanna Van Zandt used to be like, we're gonna go in here. So I went in here and I listened to myself and I said, well, this is there's an ethical issue. There's an ethical issue that is here. But I'll talk about that later on in the season. So let's pivot. Imagine the data for a moment. You have a candidate who has optimized workflows for multi-million-dollar facilities, sitting in a cubicle doing entry-level processing. We eventually were able to work from home, but we had to do the cubicle thing for a little bit. This isn't just a waste of time. That's how I felt. That's how I felt. I oscillated between the two things of, I guess I ought to be grateful, but this is a waste of time. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That was the internal thing that I was going through in my head, but I'm going to just put that right there. It was a systemic inefficiency. I watched as white colleagues with half of my certifications, people I would have been training in any other market, they were being fast tracked to other positions. I seen that in Maximus. I seen that at the University of Rochester. I didn't see that at Anthony Jordan. And those are the only places that I worked at here in Rochester. So the majority of the places that I worked at, I saw that. And this is because they went to the right high school, I guess. They played golf at the right clubs. The one thing that I saw, even when I did my executive residency, is, and this was amongst white women, they would go out for drinks. You see my shoulders? They would go out for drinks. And that somehow created this bond. But their level of whiteness superseded anything. Oh, child, I got double teamed on a project. It was the Lean Six Sigma certification project. Yeah. And it was three white women trying to make me feel bad when they were in the wrong. So I understand this whole fit. And so as it drills down to Rochester, this is the unspoken aesthetic for Rochester and its power dynamic. But here's the thing that they fail to realize is that high performers are like water. They seek the path of least resistance to their highest potential. That was me. If you tell a high performer to sit in a stagnant pool and wait their turn while they watch the fit express lane zip past them, they won't wait. I didn't wait. I went to DC. And the way that we characterize this is that they evaporate. They cease to exist in that city. I evaporated. I left Rochester so many times. I often ask myself, why is it that I'm back? If it wasn't for the political stuff that's going on right now, I would not be back. I wouldn't. I wouldn't be back. They go to cities where Black excellence is the baseline requirement. You see that in the DMV area. That includes DC. You see that in New York City. You see that in Atlanta. You see that in Dallas. You see that in Houston. Just to name a few. It's not a diversity threat to be managed. Here in Rochester, this is how this goes of like when they say culture fit, they feel like they're controlling, excuse me, the diversity. And it shouldn't be like that. It should not be like that at all. So when Rochester says wait your turn, Atlanta says here's your budget. That's the difference. And I can attest to that. I can attest to that. That's exactly what it is. You know what I mean? And it isn't, it's not a hard choice. It's not a hard choice to make that leap. Make that leap. It's just it is what it is. And so this is how you kill a city soul. One culture fit rejection at a time. That lamest terms. That's what that is. So now we're gonna look at the historical context. We're gonna look at the historical context of Rochester Jobs Incorporated. Let's delve deep into it. It says to understand why this gatekeeping is so baked into the soil of the Flower City, we have to look at the ghost. You got to go back in history for a little bit. Let's go back to 1964. After the July riots, the white power structure in Rochester wasn't just shocked, they were terrified. They realized they just couldn't keep, well, they couldn't just keep black people out of the economy entirely anymore without the city burning down. So they did what Rochester does best. They formed a committee. They formed all these committees, and a lot of these initiatives are so performative. But I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anything at all. They created Rochester Jobs Incorporated, known as RJI. On paper, RJI was a miracle. It was a coalition of the big three. That big three included Kodak, excuse me, can't talk today, Kodak, Xerox, and Bachelin. The goal was to hire the unemployable, with quotes around it, unemployable, to bridge the gap between the 7th Ward and the corporate campus. But here is the forensic truth. RJI was never about wealth creation. It was about pacification. So they wanted to pacify black people. That's what it was. But they're still giving black people crumbs while they get the whole cake. And that's been the history of Rochester. My grandmother, she told me stories about this. She mentioned RJI? I was about to get tongue tied. RJI. She also mentioned Fight, and she mentioned L-Trax. She saw the RJI men coming home. She saw how Kodak would hire black men for the silver rooms or the loading docks, the most toxic, back-breaking parts of the plant. They were in the company, but they weren't of the company, if that makes any sense. They were never let near the patents. They were never let near the boardrooms. They were never given the equity that built the mansions in Pittsburgh. This created the permission slip economy. We were allowed to have jobs, but we weren't allowed to have industries. We were diversity suppliers. We were the feel-good press release. But because we were tethered to their permission, we were the first to be cut when the stock price dipped. We weren't building our own table. We were just grateful for the crumbs, like I said before, the crumbs falling off of theirs. And when the big three collapsed, the people who only had the permission slips were left with nothing. So in the black community here in Rochester, many of you who are older, the boomer generation, will talk about your time at Kodak, focusing on the money and all that other stuff. And sometimes y'all will leverage that against my generation. I'm a millennial. And you guys will say, oh, we just want stuff handed to us. We're impatient. We didn't have to fight the fight that you had to fight because you guys made it better. I'm not looking down on your scrimmage, but at the end of the day, y'all were taken advantage of. The money, the retirement, the 401ks, the this, the that, the pensions, the stuff that y'all got, y'all thought that was big money. When in the grand scheme of things, it was a sliver. It was a sliver of what was out there. And some of y'all, not all of y'all, were the hired help. And being that my generation does not want to be the hired help, we feel as though work needs to look completely different We want to build tables and not be sitting there trying to fight for a seat at a table that no one wants us to be at. Some of y'all will look down upon us. You know, when I started this podcast, I knew just because of my mind and the way that I think and the depths of research that I do, I knew I was going to get somewhere and reach an intersection like this. And what my hope is, we almost done with this episode, but what my hope is that this starts conversations between generations within the Black community. Stop hiding stuff. This is to my boomer generation and some of y'all Gen Xers. Stop hiding stuff. Be honest. Be transparent with what the struggle was. Because when you're unrealistic, then we are unrealistic until, like as my grandmother says, you gotta go to know. You gotta go to know. So instead of having to go to know, how about you save us the time and tell us exactly what it really was? That's what we need to do. We need to have more honest, open and honest conversations. That's what that is. But let's go on. The sovereignty blueprint. So what do we do? If you're a Black professional in Rochester right now, and you feel that invisible resume weight on your shoulders, you have two choices. So let's go over the choices. You keep the brain drain going, you take your talent and you leave. And there's no shame in that. There's no shame in that because I done did that several times. So I'm the last one to be judging anybody on anything when it comes to that. Survival is a form of resistance. But you have choice too. You can stay and shift the model. We have to stop being applicants and start being vendors. This is the sovereignty blueprint. When you are an applicant, you are selling your time. When you are a vendor, you are selling a result. If a local hospital wouldn't hire you as an administrator because you don't fit the culture, this is what I'm going through right now. You don't have to keep sending resumes. You find in my case, other people who have similar master's degrees to me. And again, that master's degree is the Master's of Science in Healthcare Administration. You form a consulting group, which is what I'm in the process of doing right now. It's just me. So if you watch this and you got the same background that I have, hit the kid up. Let me know. And you don't say, I want a job. You say, your patient intake waste is costing you $12,000 a day. My fee to fix that is $150,000. Because trust and believe, we're going to get paid what we're worth. We're going to get paid what we're worth. And I'm going to just tell you just like this right now. There are some people who have benefited from culture fit, but a lot of them do not have the education nor experience. And sometimes they get on these projects and they get flustered. A lot of times they get flustered. They don't know what to do. And here's the whole thing. And I want to say this, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. When it comes to these people, the chalk colored people, they don't get fired. They have to do something extremely horrible in order to get fired. They just get moved around in the company. We're the ones that get fired. Sometimes for stuff that we didn't even do. Like if we go back in the time machine, when I talk about Atlanta, and she said that I was starting drama with people, I had so much work. What am I going to, I don't have the time to start drama. First of all, that's not even in my nature. But she did that because she was intimidated. Let me tell you what I was doing. I was rolling in a new EDC program for the people who have worked in clinical research, for the people who work in IT. I was in a project manager's capacity. I'm rolling in new software. I'm doing budget reconciliation. In addition to that, I'm reviewing contracts. So when do I have the time to start drama with anybody? If I was that type of person, when do I have time to start drama with anybody? Help me understand. Help me understand. But this is some advice that I'm going to give because I can speak to this. We have to stop the lone wolf mentality. Because let me tell you, it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. Brain drain happens because we leave one by one. Sovereignty happens when we stay together. If you would have told me this in my early 20s, I would have looked at you like your face fell off. I would have looked at you like your face fell off. I would have been like, nope, I'm doing me. I don't know what you're going to do, but I'm doing me. And it is what it is. But now that I'm at the age that I'm at right now, 36, this makes more sense if you want to stay in a place like Rochester. Because when you go to the larger cities, a lot of those black professionals, they have their own network of people. They do. Regardless if they're a transplant or not. Sometimes they're part of a fraternity or sorority, but some of them aren't. And they still have their own network because there is power in numbers. But I digress. In the sovereignty blueprint, we form a braid. You, the CPA, you, the data scientist, you, the Six Sigma expert, then you can include other areas of expertise as well. Together, you are a full service management firm. Why are we letting out of town firms from Virginia or Maryland take the diversity spend in Rochester? Because they have the infrastructure. We have the brains. We just need to build the shell around them. Finally, understand the power of the invoice. A paycheck is a grant of mercy. An invoice is a legal claim. It took me a while to get to understand that one. I learned it in Cincinnati when I had an MPI number and I was able to bill. Things that you typically don't see with someone with my background. That goes to show that I done went into some spaces and some places, right? So no one can't play me like no fool, okay? But we're gonna keep going. Sovereignty means that if Rochester won't give you the title, you create the title. And then you charge them for the privilege of your presence. Your degree is not a request for a job. It is a license to build. Stop asking for a seat at a table that was built to keep you in the kitchen. Build the table, rent them the chairs, send them the invoice. The brain drain stops when we realize the brain doesn't belong to the city, it belongs to us. And that's my closeout. But I want y'all to really take this in and really understand where we are at. That's my 2 cents. You have a good day.